And congratulations, Nissan electric vehicle drivers, for officially gaining access to the Tesla supercharger network. Woohoo! With a few weird oddities. Yeah, we got some weird things to talk about when it comes to Nissan officially gaining Tesla supercharger access. Yes, they actually now can officially use the superchargers that are not Magic Dock locations, as long as they're V3s. But there's a few weird things about both Nissan electric vehicles. Yes, actually, to my surprise, even the Nissan Leaf technically has access to those superchargers, which is kind of cool. Though again, there's a lot of complications with that, and there's even complications with Nissan's CCS vehicle, the Ariya. So let's dive in and explain what the heck is going on and how to charge your Nissan Ariya or Leaf on the Tesla supercharger network. I'm going to start off with the Nissan Ariya, since apparently that's the product that Nissan cares about the most, but also that's the simpler one to start off with. In order to charge your Nissan Ariya on the Tesla supercharger network, you will of course need to buy the official Tesla NACS to CCS adapter kit. Wait, well, hold on. This is a kit? You mean you need more than just the adapter in order to charge on the Tesla superchargers? Yes, you actually need more than just the adapter itself in order to charge on the supercharger network. But here's the reason why. It's actually not as elaborate or advanced of a kit that you think. It's not like, oh, you need to do a charge port ECU swap or something like that. No, here's what's actually involved in the whole kit. The kit includes the NACS to CCS adapter itself, obviously, and a little plastic piece. That's it. That's all that's included in the kit. Oh, wait. Why does it need this particular plastic piece? Let me show you. Now, this isn't an exact Nissan Ariya CCS port here, but this can kind of give you an example at least. So obviously we have the J1772 AC charging connector right here, and then the DC pins below that. And on this particular inlet that I have here, you might notice there's a couple holes right here. And on the Nissan Ariya's charge port, there's actually a gap on the center portion right here. Obviously this adapter doesn't show it, but it kind of gives you an idea. Just pretend this hole slots even further through the middle here. There's a gap right there, and that's actually what that plastic piece is for. Now, what's the problem with the gap being there? Well, it turns out Tesla's official NACS to CCS adapter has an extra little button on the inside that in theory is supposed to press right there. If that button is not pressed in, then I believe the proximity pilot is technically disconnected and the car will not actually see that an adapter is plugged in.
And I was very much wrong on exactly what that plunger button is actually supposed to be. No, it does not actually disconnect the proximity pilot. What it actually does is it basically locks the tab that releases the NACS connector from pushing down. It just makes the lock immobile, so that way you can't accidentally unplug the cable while it's still hot. It's a safety item basically that enforces, okay, in order for you to disconnect the NACS connector, you first have to disconnect it from the vehicle, and the vehicle will only let go of the adapter if charging has stopped. That's what the plunger button on the inside between the two DC pins is for. Back to the video.
In theory, it's supposed to be a safety item. That's what it's for. It's just to make sure that the connector is properly seated, although I'm not entirely sure what's wrong with just the latch in general that floats above the entire connector as a whole. Because in order for that thing to actually, well, engage the car to say, yeah, the connector is fully plugged in, that latch has to be down, click in fully, and in order for it to click in, the connector has to be in all the way. As to demonstrate here, I'll take my CCS connector here. This is not inserted all the way. Despite that, you might think, oh, pins should be making contact. Because the lever in here above hasn't actually fully dropped, it's still actually in the upright position, the car would still have no idea that a connector is plugged in. You have to push it in all the way. Now that you hear that click was the latch above clicking into place. And now the proximity pilot is in. So why that plunger between the DC pins needs to be pushed, why is that there? I don't understand, because it's not on basically any other CCS connector. Like for example, this one here, there's no button on the inside here. I don't know, it's just Tesla decided they needed that for an extra safety component. But because there's nothing on the CCS inlet on the Nissan Ariya to push that down, you need to insert this extra plastic piece so that way it pushes the plunger in, and therefore the adapter thinks, oh, we're plugged in. Let's tell the car we're plugged in. So yeah, that's the actual complication with charging the Nissan Ariya. Now, there are some other adapters on the market, like the Electron Vortex adapter or A to Z's Typhoon Pro adapter. Those don't have that little plunger thing on it because, well, they're basically using the same thing that CCS here uses. It's no different than what you'd find in your standard CCS connector. So technically, you wouldn't actually need the plastic piece in order to use those adapters. It's if you want to use the official Tesla NACS to CCS, and it's just like the rest for now. Still recommended, basically only use Teslas. Otherwise, you might void some warranties, or you could be found liable if something goes wrong and such like that. Yeah, the automakers really do not endorse using third-party adapters out there, except General Motors, I believe, is also selling Electron's adapter, and Ford, I believe, is partnered up with them as well to sell their adapter as well. So we're kind of starting to see some other non-Tesla adapters being recommended by the automakers to use. But for the most part, to play it safe, most people are probably just going to say, you know what, use the official NACS to CCS adapter. If something goes wrong, you won't be hosed financially for it, supposedly. I don't know what goes on legally, but you get the point. Okay, other than the whole adapter trying to engage a fiasco, basically after you plug it in, it's the same as a General Motors and Volvo Polestar EV. You just go to the Tesla app and you activate the stall like that. There's no fancy plug-in charge because Ariya does not support ISO 15118 plug-in charge, at least as of yet. And so, yeah, you just activate it the same way you do with a General Motors or Volvo and Polestar EV. How about the Nissan Leaf, though? That's the Ariya. What about the Nissan Leaf? Because there's an even bigger complication with the Nissan Leaf. See, most EVs out there, you might have noticed, use this connector here for AC charging. In fact, even the Nissan Leaf uses the J1772 connector. Or actually, let me grab the connector itself so you actually know what I'm talking about. This right here. Basically, every non-Tesla at this point uses this connector until the NACS transition is officially finished, including the Nissan Leaf. However, while those same vehicles typically use the CCS variant, which is just this connector, but with two DC pins on the bottom, the Nissan Leaf does not use this connector with the DC pins on the bottom for DC charging. They use a separate connector that's a much older standard and is extremely pathetic and is kind of dying here in the United States, if I'm being honest. They're using CHAdeMO. The reason why was because, well, the Nissan Leaf came out in what, 2009, 2010, sometime around there. And around those times, CCS was not even a standard yet. And so because Nissan wanted to do some form of fast charging, they've initially partnered up with Japanese electric utilities or something, because the CHAdeMO standard was actually initially born in Japan. And so it was Nissan and the Japanese electric utilities. They came up with CHAdeMO. And because Nissan started selling the Leaf outside of Japan and they sold it here in the US, well, that's how we have some CHAdeMO chargers here in the United States as well. But obviously, it is a sad, weak, pathetic standard that basically nobody even uses. I'm still surprised that Nissan is still selling the Leaf brand new, though I hear they're going to be ending production really soon. And really, there's only two other electric vehicles I can think of that actually use the CHAdeMO standard here in North America. Or excuse me, there's three vehicles, I guess. The Mitsubishi i-MiEV with the optional DC fast charging, which again, for DC fast charging, it uses a CHAdeMO port. And believe it or not, Mitsubishi also makes a plug-in hybrid that has CHAdeMO DC charging capabilities, strangely enough. And then the final vehicle in the US that has CHAdeMO is the Kia Soul EV. There was a time where the Kia Soul EV actually used CHAdeMO. They're using CCS today, and I'm sure it won't be long before they switch that thing to NACS as well. But yeah, there's technically Kia Souls out there with CHAdeMO plugs for DC charging. Other than that, unless it's a Tesla vehicle, as of today, pretty much everything else uses CCS. So CHAdeMO's a dying standard, and it's for a good reason. However, the Nissan Leaf technically has the ability to access the supercharger network too. But how's this? Well, it gets a little pricey, sadly. You see, in order to charge the Nissan Leaf via the Tesla supercharger network, obviously you need to use DC power, so you got to use that CHAdeMO plug. But as of right now, unfortunately, there aren't any NACS to CHAdeMO adapters. So instead, you have to buy a really expensive, this costs like roughly $1,000, and it's because unlike NACS to CCS, they basically both use the exact same software communications. And because of that, all you need is a passive adapter. You don't need any computer inside it to do any translation and such, because NACS and CCS use the exact same language. However, CHAdeMO does not. And as a result, you need a computer computer to translate CCS or NACS communications to CHAdeMO. And that's why the CCS to CHAdeMO adapter, again, there's no NACS to CHAdeMO yet. I'm sure that'll come out at some point, but as of right now, there's only a CCS to CHAdeMO adapter. The reason why it's so expensive is because you have to make sure you have room for a computer. You're also going to need a battery inside of that to power the computer inside. And in general, it gets real costly. So yeah, the CCS to CHAdeMO adapter is like $1,000. So you first have to get this adapter, and then you need a NACS to CCS adapter on top of that. So it's just a whole train wreck of adapters you need in order to charge the Leaf. But once you get the CCS to CHAdeMO and then the NACS to CCS, plug them into each other, plug them into a supercharger, activate the supercharger via the app because, well, obviously the Nissan Leaf is not going to support ISO 15118 because that's a CCS/NACS communication. After this whole adapter mess, yes, you can technically charge a Nissan Leaf on the supercharger network. It's just going to be very costly. And is it worth it? I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I'll leave that up to your judgment, but hey, at least the Nissan Leaf can access the best charging network in the United States and Canada and North America in general. Yeah, despite that there's a few weird things about Nissan's vehicles in terms of gaining supercharger access, they finally have it. Now we just have to wait for the actual NACS inlets to be the vehicle's standard, so that way we don't need any of these stupid adapters, especially for the poor Leaf. The poor Leaf needs 2 adapters in order to charge on the supercharger network. That's just sad. But all right, there's your news in that regards. That's exciting. Can't wait for the next one to come on board. By the way, Hyundai is really close to actually launching the Ioniq 5, and I assume the Ioniq 6 as well. I haven't heard much about that, but the Ioniq 5, I'm sure the Ioniq 6 is in the pipeline as well. And then also the Hyundai Ioniq 9 apparently is coming with NACS from the get-go. That's exciting. So yeah, Hyundai's getting ready to launch their first NACS vehicle. Lucid with the Gravity is doing the same, and there's a whole bunch of other electric vehicles coming real soon that'll actually have NACS inlets. So, oh, this will be so exciting. All right, that's it. I'm out of news. Thank you for watching. Do me a favor and interact with the stuff below. My name is DeWolf, Random Alpha, signing out.